So I will mention that I have a new book coming out in December called The Dragons of Deepwood Fen. It's book one of a new series. It's more draconic based and more George Martin-esque, or Game of Thrones-esque, I should say, with a Roman Empire influence, playing the baddie role. So here it is. That's the cover. So you can take a look at that if you like big epic fantasies. And then you can find me at linktree.bbleyer. My socials are there. I have a store. I have writing courses that I give on my website. You can check that out as well. And then I used this for Gen Con just a few weeks ago, or a month or so ago. I have presentations there for all my Gen Con ones, but this one is there too. So if you want, grab it. It's just a PDF, it can free you to sort of concentrate on this instead of like taking notes if you're taking notes. All right, so the origin of this talk. Kiz Johnson, who was a Wisconsin-based writer, used to go to Gen Con, and she gave writing presentation seminars, and she mentioned in the Empire Strikes Back, after the Battle of Hoth, Luke goes to Dagobah while Han and Leia go on the Millennium Falcon, and they end up on Bespin in the Cloud City, right? So you have this movie where you have two distinct threads that are going on, and it just goes back and forth between them. And she mentioned, like how one references the other. So Luke, when he's on Dagobah, he fights a Phantom Vader, and Vader's not there. Vader is on Bespin. In fact, Vader's waiting for him. Vader knows Luke will come to him. That's another echo, or say, pulling that other thread into the other one so that they don't feel like individual threads. They feel like a cohesive whole that's telling a single story. Luke senses Han's torture. He's on Dagobah, but he senses Han's torture on Bespin. Vader is preparing the carbonite machine. It ends up getting Han because he has to test it before he gets to Luke, but he says it's for Luke, right? And so, again, Luke is still on Dagobah at that point. And so that got me to thinking about, and I think she might have called it that or something like that, connective tissue, or these threads tying two timelines together. And so what is it? What is this concept of connective tissue? Well, that is one type of connective tissue that I just talked about. And so that can heighten, it tightens the storyline. If you have, I tend to write these big epic fantasies with multi-POVs. And I think one thing George Martin does really well in A Game of Thrones is like referencing other things that have happened, battles perhaps, or things that they're worried about, or a lie that spun out of control and caused something somewhere else in the kingdom, what have you. It helps bring all that stuff together, because otherwise it would feel like, like 7, 8 monolithic stories that don't have a lot to do with each other, right? It's really important when you have this kind of thing to do that type of thing, to bring them together. Okay, so it runs between these parallel threads to form a weave, connects various parts of the story, including backstory and future events. And so why does this matter? Well, as I said, it does bind your story. It makes the pieces of the story feel greater than the whole. Other way around, it makes the whole feel greater than the pieces, the sum of the pieces. So it brightens the story, deepens it, enriches it. It's part of what makes a good story great. Makes it more satisfying in the end. So I started thinking about what other types of connective tissue there could be. And so we talk about backstory. That is a type of connective tissue. You're talking about something in the past that has bearing, hopefully, on the present. And so you're referencing a part of the world that has already happened. Foreshadowing. You're sort of hinting at what's coming. You're creating expectations in the reader. We'll talk about all of these in more detail. A payoff is something where you're expecting some kind of hellacious argument or a fight or even a sex scene in like a romance. You'll hint at it and then you'll give it to the reader at some point. That is a payoff. Even the tone of the story. If you're comedic, horrific, adventurous, what have you. That stuff you'll want to sort of hit those notes again and again, so it feels like that's what the story is. Echoes are these like thread cohesion thing I talked about. Characters, reinforcing character. So in this presentation, we're going to talk about future. I broke them up into these 3 chunks. Future, so setting up future events. So an example in Harry Potter is, in Harry Potter 4, the kids all went to this Quidditch World Cup. And in the Quidditch World Cup, there was a particular player called Victor Crumb, who is still in school. And he comes to Hogwarts at one point. And so we see him as a player first, and that sets up like Ron's, and maybe Harry's to a degree, their awe of this character before we ever meet him. You know, so it's a hint of what's coming. They're also present type connective tissue. So maybe reinforcing established traits in a character. So Harry's headaches from his scar. So I think in that same Harry Potter 4, but it's really a theme throughout the entire series. He received his lightning bolt scar from Voldemort when his mother was killed. And so it is his connection to Voldemort. And that is used as sort of a shorthand for these two are connected. They have entwined lives. Voldemort killed his mother. Harry is destined to confront him. We don't know that he's going to kill him in the beginning, but he's destined to confront him at some point. And so that comes up again and again, and it happens sort of in the present. And we remember the other ones, but it happens in the here and now. And then past. So reaching into the past. So the death of Harry Potter's parents, for example, that is used again and again to show what Harry is really looking for, what he's searching for. He wants family in the end. He has lost his family. He finds family in Ron and Hermione and his schoolmates at Hogwarts, in Dumbledore, right? So that is used over and over again. All right, so what we're going to talk about, I'm not going to go in detail now, just list them. So we'll talk about the prologue, what that means to a story, foreshadowing, setting up a payoff. We'll talk about the payoff later. The plot, how we set up the climax of the story, plot twists, and then red herrings. Present, so future, present, past. So in the present, we have this thread cohesion idea we talked about with Star Wars, the tone and the mood of the story. You'll want to reinforce that, building your characters, building your world, and progressing the plot. And then past. So we mentioned backstory. I mentioned payoff here because we set up a payoff and then we deliver it. And when we deliver it, we will be sort of referencing those past events. The reader will definitely be thinking about those things. Same thing with a plot twist. We'll have hints probably along the way, and then we'll get the twist. The end of the story, and the denouement is a special scene at the end that we'll talk about. All right, and so how we're going to be talking about these things are with anchor points. And this is my own little invention just to talk about this stuff. So anchor points ground two things in the story. So let's just take backstory. So something happens in the here and now. We have to know a bit more about Voldemort to understand why he wants Harry, right? And so we're going into the past, but we're talking about it in the here and now. Those are the two anchor points. What happened in the past? What's going on right now? And I'm going to use that over and over again. Yeah. Okay. And then we'll talk about it like this. So we have the story continuum where the past is to the left and the story progresses to the right. And so we may have something like, not every story has a prologue, but some do. So I want to talk about that. And then we begin the story. And so that little green section here is usually the first chapter, typically. And at the end of that is the inciting incident. So the green section is where the characters living their life in their normal world, whatever that means to them. Harry does not yet know he's a wizard, right? He's living with the Dursleys and getting crapped on by them daily, basically. And at the end of that is the inciting incident. A letter comes from Hogwarts telling him he's a wizard. Okay? And then the story itself, we get to the climax, the denouement, and then hopefully you give a sense that the story goes on after you're done, after the last page is done. So that's what we're going to be talking about in connective tissue. And we're going to do it with The Incredibles. So have you guys seen The Incredibles? Yeah? Okay, good. All right, so just as a reminder, it's Edna, the designer, Syndrome, the bad guy, Violet, Dash, Mr. Incredible, Elastigirl, and then Frozone. Okay, so we're going to go through each of those. All right, so a future prologue. Why is that a future thing? So the prologue is a special scene or a chapter that not only illuminates the past, but it sets up expectations for the future. It is not there just to be a scene on its own. It must be. It must earn its page time in essence. And so in The Incredibles, there's that prologue where Mr. Incredible saves the train, and is actually kind of like fighting a bunch of crimes along the way, right? But at the end, he stops that train from derailing, at least partially. But a few people are hurt along the way, and that triggers a whole wave of lawsuits against the government. And the government are the people who have sanctioned these superheroes, right? Including Mr. Incredible and Elastigirl. And so it forces the superheroes, the government makes them go underground. And they must have secret personas. They can't advertise who they are anymore. Okay, so that's the prologue. And that gives hint to everything that comes. And we'll talk about this as we talk about the payoffs and stuff. But that's what the prologue is doing. It's kind of giving hints. It's showing what things were like in the past and what changed because of whatever happened. In this case, the main characters were involved. That's not always true. And then that will be echoed in the future. Okay, so foreshadowing. So foreshadowing, we're trying to give the reader some sense that something is coming, right? Usually it's either, like a mystery, so it intrigues them, or we give a sense something bad is happening. So there's a sense of foreboding that you're trying to build, over time. And you can't really do that once, with one event is what I should say. So if you're trying to build up a satisfying event in the future, you want to hint at it multiple times. Okay, so in The Incredibles, Mirage is the woman, this femme fatale character who is working for Syndrome. We don't know that in the beginning, but she is spying on Mr. Incredible and his buddy Frozone, who are both no longer supers. They're not supposed to be fighting crime anymore, but when they go bowling with each other, they're actually listening to the police scanner, right? And they're listening for things that are happening, and they go and they fight a fire, they save some people, and Mirage is watching the whole time. And so we see her, and then she talks to somebody. She says, "I found Mr. Incredible." And that's about the extent of it, right? And we don't know who, she's talking to. We don't know why she's talking to him, but that's like a hint that something's coming, right? So we have now intrigued the watcher in this case, but in fiction case, a reader, about wondering, what's going on. It's interesting enough in itself that they're like sort of reliving their past, but it's even more interesting now that somebody is watching them do it for unknown reasons. And we get several hints of that before we fully understand who she is and why she's watching them. Okay, so that's what foreshadowing is about. Okay, so the payoff setup. So what is a payoff? Again, it's often like an argument that you're hinting that's coming, a sword duel with somebody, an argument with romance, maybe a sexual encounter between two characters, whatever. One example from The Incredibles is Elastigirl. She smacks Mirage, the woman that was watching them, across the jaw, knocking her out. And this happens on the island that Bob gets to eventually, right? So that is built up along the way. What we see is we kind of know what's happening. We know Bob is lying to Elastigirl. Elastigirl doesn't know, she hasn't cottoned on to that he's lying to her. She doesn't know where he's gone or what he's doing. She does find eventually a white hair on his superhero outfit that shouldn't be there, and he shouldn't be using that thing anymore. But she finds that Edna has sewn a cut in it, So she knows something's going on. Long platinum blonde hair. She's starting to think, what the hell's going on? Bob's lying to me. Why? So when this payoff comes, there's been several instances of her picking up that something is going on, starting to figure out that a woman is involved. And so when she sees her, she just smacks her across the room because she can stretch and do it, right? And so it's like it's satisfying because the reader will have picked up on those things along the way, along with the characters, right? And so you're finally delivering it. And so it would not be satisfying if you only did it once. You want to do that multiple times, right? And then deliver a payoff. Similarly, Mr. Incredible is told by Mirage that he has to go to this island. She works for a company, she says, that has built these robots, like maybe for military defense purposes, and one has gone out of control, and they need Bob's help, Mr. Incredible's help, to defeat it. And so there's a whole bunch of lead up. He does a bunch of training. He understands from her what's going on. He's going to go to the island. He goes to the island. He's looking around for the robot in this jungle, right? And then finally the robot battle comes, and it's super satisfying because it was built up along the way. So this is what we're doing. This payoff setup, we are hinting at things that are coming so that the actual event is more satisfying for the reader. So payoffs are set up over the course of the story. You'll give hints. You'll eventually pull the trigger by giving the reader what they want. And so, so the maxim is, as the writer, create a slow increase in tension in the reader's mind by repetition and by extending the time between between these things. The reader won't really pick up on a pattern until the second occurrence. If we were only in Elastigirl's point of view and we see something is strange going on with Bob once, we'll be like, okay, whatever, just a random occurrence. Second time, okay, something weird is going on. Third time, okay, now I'm getting pissed, right? And I'm going to confront him or whatever. So we repeat that so that it builds expectations in the reader's mind and then eventually satisfaction. That's what we're looking for in the end. And we can only get that if we build it up, build that expectation on the part of the reader. In a very similar way, we do the same thing with the plot itself, the climax. We are building from page 1 to the end. We are forecasting towards that in some way. Now, one perhaps exception is that opening scene. In the opening scene, we're often seeing the main characters in their everyday world. But by the end of that, typically, end of the first chapter, we will have seen the inciting incident. And so that is absolutely related to the climax. And probably what we see in that first chapter is involved as well, because what we're seeing typically, what you want to show very often, is their internal arc. What does that character want? Harry Potter is shit on by his adopted family, and so we don't really get it yet. But that is absolutely related to what he really wants in life, and that is family. He's lost his family. He doesn't really have one, as it opens, and he wants that, And so that is kind of part and parcel of the whole story too. So when I say the opening scene is maybe an exception, it really isn't. We do want to fold in a character's internal desires into the overall story, is where I'm going with that. But all along the way, we will be building up expectations about where is the story headed. It won't be clear in the beginning to the readers typically. Even if there's a very defined goal, the Fellowship of the Ring has to bring the ring to Mount Doom. That's pretty clear pretty early in the trilogy, right? But the way that they get there is very unexpected, right? They go different ways to actually get there. And so that's what we're doing along the way. We're building tension. We're forcing the characters to get closer to their goals in unexpected and interesting, adventurous, horrific, satisfying ways. Whatever your story is. So in this case, Syndrome is Buddy. Buddy is the boy who started the Mr. Incredible fan club that jumped in Mr. Incredible's car in the prologue. In the prologue, he showed up, right? And he is the bad guy that they have to defeat in the end. Not the robot, it's Syndrome. And so he turns out to be the real enemy. He's creating these robots. They are not perfect. They eventually get out of control. So they have to, the family must come together in the end and defeat Syndrome and the robot and win the day. Again, somewhat similar, a plot twist. So a twist in a story is something where the story goes in an unexpected direction. So in the case of the Incredibles, Mr. Incredible was brought to the island not to help defeat a robot in partnership with Mirage and her company, but in fact to test that robot and make it better so that it can defeat Mr. Incredible. That's the real story behind it. But we don't know that in the beginning. And so we want, as writers, we want to sort of spoon feed the reader, like thinking, oh, well, okay, it makes sense that a robot would go out of control. I don't really get why Mirage was watching them behind the scenes. I don't really understand who she was talking to, but this is in the realm of possibility. Oh, it's not that at all. It's Syndrome trying to build a better robot, essentially. And so you cannot do that in one fell swoop. You must kind of set up expectations and then pull the rug out from under the reader. Now, there's all kinds of fiction out there. There are cases where a plot twist totally blindsides the readers. And I think in that instance, you must digest that after the fact. You will sort of support it after the fact. So you will still have events that sort of support what happened. It's just that the characters may not understand really what happened until it happened, and they put effort towards really getting what's going on. And they may have to do that so they understand, who did it, why they did it, how they can stop it, that kind of thing. So not all plot twists are fully set up ahead of time. Many are, some aren't. The ones that aren't, I think you do have to sort of digest them after the fact and justify them. Otherwise it feels arbitrary. It feels nonsensical. It feels easy on the part of the author, and the readers will sort of bounce off of that. So you have to be careful. All right, and then red herrings. So used all the time in mysteries. In Harry Potter, the very first book, Rowling goes out of her way to make the reader think it's Snape who's the one that is sort of controlling things, and he's the bad guy, right? It isn't. It's Quirrell. Quirrell is the one who is working for Voldemort and trying to bring him back to life with the unicorn blood and stuff. And so, as writers, we have to sort of figure out what our red herring is going to be, and we have to sort of, again, spoon feed the reader into thinking one thing, only to find out that it's in fact something else. So it's similar to plot twist, but it's a different technique. All right, so we're moving into the present at this point. So we talked about Star Wars and the thread cohesion. So we may have two or more parallel threads in a story. Star Wars is one example, Game of Thrones, plenty of multi-POVs. So when we do that, I think it's important to link them in some way, not only to keep both of the threads fresh in the reader's mind. I mean, you may spend pages and pages, maybe chapters in one thread and not be sort of visiting the other one. But I think it's important to sort of bring that, fold that stuff in somehow, events that are happening in another place, thinking about and pining after, hating people from that other thread, what have you. There's lots of ways to do it. But I think we need to do that to make the story feel whole. Okay, so in The Incredibles, when Mr. Incredible goes to the island, he defeats the robot. He narrowly escapes Syndrome, and he hides in that cave and stuff. And then he sneaks back into the lair, Syndrome's lair. And he goes and he finds this database of supers. And so he's starting to understand what is going on. I don't think he knows. No, I think he does know who Syndrome is at that point. But he's finding out, Cinema has created multiple robots, and so it shows these iterations of the robots, right? Defeated by whoever, the super on the other side. And then new Mark II, Mark III, Mark IV, and then some of the supers start dying, and it kind of goes back and forth. And then so by the end of that, he knows what's going on, but he is freaking out because he's worried now. The Syndrome has also figured out where Elastigirl is, who she is, his wife, right? In a similar way, back on the mainland, Elastigirl finds that long white hair on the costume. And so that is Mirage's hair. She is on the island, so is Bob. So we're connecting these two things together, right? She also, Elastigirl finds that Mr. Incredible's old suit has been repaired, leading her to Edna, the costume fashion designer. And then back on the island, Bob looks up in the database whether or not Elastigirl's whereabouts were found, and they're still unknown, and there's this huge amount of relief, right? So just back and forth. And so those two things feel like we're in the same story, and it does a lot to pull this thing together. Because it's not just about events, it's about like these two characters caring about each other, even though they're not together. We clearly see that they love one another from afar, even though they're not even in the same, geographic area. And the writers of that movie were wise to do that. So still in present, the tone and the mood of the story. So the tone is something that you establish from page 1. You want to give the reader a sense right away, what the story is going to be like. Now, that's not to say that you won't deviate from that tone now and again. You certainly will. But you just want to establish that so that the reader feels it. They sort of know what to expect. In The Incredibles, the tone is like this 60s James Bond film with the golden age of comics as a backdrop. Just a really cool mix, right? And they pay very special attention to making it feel that way. The whole secret agent type thing and the comic thing is just constantly hit on, from the and the 1960s style too. It just evokes a really cool feel. It's part of why I love that movie so much. And so for the tone and mood, it's just something that you'll continue to reinforce as time goes on. Yes, you will set it up from page 1, but you don't want to forget about it. And so that's something that will I put it in present because you're going to be reinforcing that in the reader as things go on, hopefully in different ways. You're not going to just one note the entire story. Think of different ways to evoke whatever feel, horrific, humorous, what have you, in your story. Character building is similar. Characters are not built in a single page, nor a scene, nor a chapter. It's a slow accretion of their decisions, their reactions, their emotions that gives the reader a sense of who they really are. Now, this isn't to say that you can't encapsulate a character early on. Often when you're doing that from like a character's point of view, and they come across the boss and he's a jerk, right? Maybe we'll find out that he's a jerk for a reason or something later on, but you can encapsulate it up front. But the stuff that really lasts with the reader is the stuff that is reinforced over time. You build a pattern, you set an expectation, and maybe you'll break that expectation, right? That boss is a jerk for 75% of the book, and then suddenly we find out why, and then it all starts to make sense. And maybe we actually sympathize with the guy. He was being forced to do it or something. Who knows? Okay. So the character now, how they are now is sort of linked. What's implied in that is like how they came to be like that and how they will act in the future. World building acts this way as well. So the things that you show to the reader, the world, will imply other things to the reader. If you have alcohol, hard alcohol, it will imply they know how to distill, liquor. If they have cars, it needs other technologies. So as you're starting to show your world, present it, reader expectations build as you broaden their knowledge of this world. In The Incredibles, the world of supers is revealed to us in bits and pieces. So when we see like some of the historical flare points, we get a sense of it in the in that prologue. But then right at the end of the prologue, we have these the lawsuits come, and there are congressional hearings and stuff, and then we get the sense that this has been building for quite some time. It's not the one event that Bob was involved in that caused everything, that caused the avalanche. The rock slide had to build over time. Bob was just the one that like instigated it, right? To everything to fall out. And so that's a super economical way on the part of those writers to imply that all kinds of things were happening up until that point, right? We see that there was government involvement. We see that there was like sort of this public perception that may have been favorable early on, but has shifted over time, to the point where they are demanding the government force these superheroes to go underground, basically. The culture that you have in your world, having that show up again and again through the characters. It'll build this world in a sort of a fractal type of way in the reader's minds over time. All right, and then I mentioned plot progression just for kind of completion. This talk isn't about plot. It's such a complex topic. So all we want to note here is that we're going to be building towards the climax through these different events that we have in the story, so that the climax itself is satisfying to the reader, but also surprising in some way. Okay, now we're shifting to past. So the one everybody thinks about is exposition, backstory, when you think about sort of the past of a story. So what's happening is you're reaching a point in the story, and the story is now reaching backwards into the past to reveal something, reveal information or what a character was like, what the world was like back then, that has, hopefully, bearing on the here and now of the story. So illuminating the past is part of the point. We do want to give a sense that the story existed to the left, of this timeline, that it is a lived-in world, and it has been there and is culturally rich. But for me, it should have bearing, whatever you're revealing, should have bearing on the here and now. So the maxim is reveal backstory only when the reader is interested in it. We talked about this during the talk. How do you achieve this? By making the past relevant to the present. So the history of the supers is a constant theme in The Incredibles, from various exploits to capes or no capes, Edna says, to monologuing, to Edna and her different costume designs and such. So those things, the writers made that stuff relevant to the story. Bob needed a new costume. His old costume got torn. That leads Elastigirl to Edna and helps her get to the island eventually. So that stuff is woven into the story itself. It is not just plopped in, as a chunk info dump type thing. Okay, so we mentioned the payoff earlier. So we set up the payoff before, but now we're delivering the payoff. So that smack from Elastigirl against Mirage Jaw. So it should follow naturally from the setup, but still be somewhat of a surprise. In this case, when Elastigirl punches her, she is shown up to this point as the rational one. She's the calm one. She's the reasoning one. She's trying to get Bob to do the right thing by their family, right? But now her emotions finally overcome her. And it's so satisfying because they set her up a certain way, right? And so for her to do that, it's even more powerful. She's not someone that does that, randomly. She has to be pushed to the edge to just smack somebody like that, right? So it's just a super satisfying thing when we come across that in that movie. And the only reason that it's satisfying is because it was set up properly. Okay, so we want to do that as writers. Plot twist, pretty similar. So we discussed the plot twist setup. We're kind of hinting that something, usually, there might be something is coming. So we're delivering it now. So the plot twist comes. So if it was a surprise to the reader, if there was no setup, you'll then start revealing some of the past to sort of have it make sense. But in this case, in The Incredibles, Syndrome is revealed as the bad guy, and we understand that he's Buddy, right? So the prologue now makes total sense. The prologue comes rushing back to the here and now of the story. Buddy was jilted by Mr. Incredible. Mr. Incredible says, "I work alone," right? And so at that very point in the story, the seed was planted in Syndrome's mind to bring the superheroes down, right? He is a gadgeteer. He's making things to give to people so that if everybody is a superhero, then nobody is, right? He wants to destroy the entire worship culture around superheroes. That's his goal. And we absolutely see it from the prologue, but we also see it from the other events, who Mirage was talking to when they were all fighting that fire. The first robot and why it was made. The hushed conversations in the lair that Bob goes to. He thinks it's some like corporate, headquarters or something. He sees Mirage talking to somebody by the lava waterfall thing, that it parts and she's talking to somebody. We don't know who it is at that point, right? But now it makes sense. She was talking to Syndrome. That's her boss, right? So all this stuff comes rushing back into this point where Syndrome is finally revealed. We get what he's doing, and we get why he's doing it. Okay. That was a brilliant one. Climax. Okay, so the climax, in similar ways, pulls everything together that's been building from the prologue, the start of the story, the inciting incident, and all through the story till we get to the end. Very tough to do. It should surprise, but still follow naturally from all the other events. So it should scratch the reader's itch for a satisfying resolution to the tale, and we only get that from having it flow naturally, but still surprise. Just a really tough skill set to develop and master. So in The Incredibles, the family, Syndrome has been making these robots. He now has the best robot, he thinks, that can defeat Mr. Incredible, can defeat anybody at this point. And so he's sending it to the capital city, where he plans to go and defeat it because he has the little controller, right? And he will save the day. He will save the world at this point. But of course, the robot goes out of control. He loses control of that robot and his thing. And even the robot itself, the robot was the one that shot it off of him because it identified Syndrome as a threat because it's self-learning, right? So he built into the robot the way to defeat even him, right? And so the family, not just Bob, Mr. Incredible, and Elastigirl, but the kids and Frozone, they all have to work together. And throughout, the parents, Elastigirl and Bob, were trying to protect the kids, keep them away from danger, right? And so this whole story, I love this thing so much. They must trust them. This is a coming of age story as well. Parents giving their kids free rein to be their own people, to come into their own, to help them even, right? And to grow beyond the point where they always need protection, right? And so they all have to team up together, and then they defeat the robot. And that's the only way it could happen. So again, it flows naturally, but it was still surprising because they had to change in the end to defeat that robot, to win the day. And then the denouement is a special scene at the very end of a story, and it's after the climax. So all the hair-raising stuff has happened. We are generally at kind of a low point in terms of like tension, and it's meant to wrap things up, but I think more importantly to sort of show that things have changed. A lot of stories are about like. The inciting incident sends things out of whack. In Star Wars, Luke comes across the robots, C-3PO and R2-D2, right? He eventually destroys the Death Star. And so they have won the day. Things are sort of back to normal, but it's different. So we have to show that things are back to normal, but we have to show how things are different too. Those are the 2 points that you're trying to achieve in the denouement. And so in The Incredibles, they go to a high school track meet in which we see that Dash is racing. And so he's been asking all along, I want to do this. And they finally give him freedom to do that. So the change in the parents has stuck. Violet is less shy than she used to be. She has grown up a little bit, right? So those lessons have kind of stuck. And Mr. Incredible and Elastigirl, they're much more trusting than they used to be. And then it all comes home when the Underminer, this mole-like guy, comes up in his like mining machine, and I'm the Underminer, and he's ready to take over the city, right? And the Incredibles are, like they kind of look at each other and they put on their masks and stuff, and they go to fight him and movie, right? And so we see that the lessons have stuck. They're willing to trust these kids again, right? And so that's the purpose. And it pulls in everything from the prologue, the start of the story, everything through to the denouement. Shows us that stuff stuck. All right, so the fact that they fight the Underminer together is important. They haven't reverted to their old ways. Okay. All right, so some tips for applying these concepts. So as you're crafting a story, as you're thinking about a story, start to think about these connective tissue. Will you have a prologue? What will the starting scene and inciting incident look like? And what does that mean? This is why I cannot write organically. I cannot write without knowing the ending, and this is partly why. I kind of have to. I want the ending to be satisfying, and I can only have that if the ending sort of echoes the beginning. And so I need to know that, and I recognize that not everybody works that way, and that's totally fine. This is just me speaking. So I want that stuff so I know that I at least have a chance to make that stuff resonate, by the end of the story. It's a different matter of really making that happen on the page, word by word. But at least I'm starting from a point of strength, right? I have a plan. I have a framework in mind. All right, so think about this stuff early on. Try to get some of this stuff in place. I recommend generally not worrying about this stuff too much while you're writing. I think if you're kind of overly concerned about structure and stuff in the actual scene, you start to forget about character and emotion, and that kind of thing. I want to live in those characters as I'm writing and worry about this stuff later. So worry about it before you write, during the world building and the plotting stage. Try to forget about it a little bit while you're writing, and then at the end, then you can kind of come back to it and see if you've hit the mark or not. So yeah, why wait? I don't want to get in the way of the writing itself. And also, a lot of things will come clear to you as you write. I say that I want a framework and stuff, but I don't have everything, down. I don't understand everything about the world and the characters and stuff. That stuff will mature, my ideas about them, as the story moves along, so that by the time I'm done with that first draft, I will have a better idea of what's happening. And so now I can start making decisions for my next draft, the follow-on draft, about what I'm going to change to sort of heighten some of these things that we've been talking about. I often say my first draft is my 0th draft. And it's my 0th draft because A, nobody's going to read it. B, it's not really done. Nobody can read it yet because it's so incomplete. And that's because of some of this stuff. Like the character have matured, the plot has matured, the world has matured, so that oddly, the characters at the end are not the same as the characters in the beginning. Like I know them so much better now at the end of the story. And so now I can take that knowledge and apply it to the second, the next draft, which is my true first draft. All right, so think about some of these things. See if there's some places where you can create resonance where there was none. Look at these different types of connective tissue. Can you enhance what's already there? Does your climax echo your prologue? Is there a connection there? Is your payoff that you have in the story satisfying without leaning too much into melodrama? Does the denouement reinforce the change in the characters? Have things stuck? The plot twists, are they set up in a reasonable yet surprising way? The backstory, is it revealed? When it's revealed, is it necessary and interesting to the story at hand? So wrapping up, connective tissue helps to make, I would contend, a story feel like a whole, not a collection of parts. It enhances your fiction by making it feel more cohesive, by highlighting the things you want to highlight. It increases reader investment and satisfaction. So try to fold these concepts in early while you're plotting and world building. And then again, during revisions, see what you have. I like the phrase, get the clay on the table, get the story written, and then you see what you have and you can really start molding it, right? Short stories are a great way to strengthen some of these things. I often recommend that type of thing if you're first getting into writing. All right. Might you have any questions? Do you have any questions? Yeah, I've tried some, what are they called? I forget the right term for it, but it's like a brainstorming tools where, yeah, mind map type stuff. I've tried a few of those things. They don't work for me. I don't know why. I've tried it on a couple different novels, but I think they work for some people. That's worth looking at because I think they sort of help you expand on ideas, and just kind of like notate that stuff and create different defined relationships between things. They're very configurable. I don't know. It felt too much like software modules to me when I was using it and stuff, and I bounced off of it. I tend to use I use Scrivener, but that's really just a outlining / writing tool, a organizer. One thing I have liked, like if you start looking at structure of story, I think that helps a lot. So like the 3-act structure is a very common one, but that's not super helpful for a novel because novels are pretty long and stuff. So like what does Act 1 look like? An author named Dan Wells did a talk on 7-point story structure. I think that's pretty illuminating. It's on YouTube, free to watch. So Dan Wells, 7-point story structure. And it's actually taken from I think an RPG manual that outlines like what you might want for like a successful campaign or something like that. But he applied it to story, and it works pretty well. And it applies very well to movies and books alike. And it's a bit more broken down than say like just a simple 3-act structure. So I like that. That's not like a software tool per se. It's really just a kind of a mindset or a definition of story and stuff, but it's helpful. Even for novels, where I have multiple POVs, I think it helps me define things that happen in the story. He talks about like initially, the inciting incident comes and the character is involved in the story, but they're not invested in it yet. And then something will happen to make them invested. And then something will happen to shorten the time frame or increase the stakes where it becomes more important, or they have less time than they thought. It just becomes a pressure cooker. And so, things like that. And I think that helps me define, like what events are going to happen in this, in the world, and what does that mean to the characters and stuff. So I do use that kind of stuff. Yeah, and Pinterest helps me a lot, actually. I guess not so much in plotting, but in staying on task, and idea generation. So I created a Pinterest board for each of my works and stuff, a separate one, and I collect, again, like garb, food, architecture, whatever. And so that helps me kind of figure out, and even like character references, like I'll pick a person that I like the look of them, they match somebody I want to have, and I'll just kind of keep referring to them because it just helps me visualize and stuff. But as I'm working on that board and filling it in, I am excited about the story at that point, and my drive to write it is great as I was creating that thing. And so when I get lost, when I get like down or whatever, I'll go back to it and it gives me, renews my verve to write the story. And then also if I just not even just talking about juice, like sometimes I'll just get lost, and I don't know where the story's going, and something in those will spark an idea like, okay, well, I could bring back this character who hasn't been around for a while, or I could explain more about the main character through this bit of architecture which has to do with her family or something like that. Just kind of living in that space helps me. And then one more thing I'll mention that is, I don't know, not so much idea generation or helping to plot or anything, but I create different playlists, and a different playlist for each work of fiction. And typically they're non-verbal, like I can't have lyrics. It just throws me out of the story just too easily. And so anyway, so I'll play those, and they're just in the background, very soft. But they do a really good job, actually, if I've been away from a story for a day or two or a week or two, of snapping me back into the right mindset. Like I'm right back in Shark Eye if I bring back my old playlist. And it really does a good job of sort of, helping me create the feel that I'm looking for, because it helps me get into that right mindset. So. Mm. Mm.
It's like I always have like these sequences with like the imagery
Mm.
in my head.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And one of the things I forgot to mention about Pinterest is that, and you may already know this, like when you find a pin, an image that works for you, whether it's a character or a place or a bit of fantasy art, whatever. If you click on it, it'll bring that one up, and then it'll bring up like related images based on like the tags or the description and stuff like that. And so early on, as you're sort of building, like the new epic fantasy I have has this notion of floating islands, and the floating islands are like magically based. There's an alchemical sort of underpinning behind a lot of the magic in the world. And so anyway, so when I first came across that idea, it was one image of like, actually several floating islands, like a mountain that had broken apart. And so I looked at that one, and there were a bunch of others, and so I pinned those as well. And same thing with a whole bunch of other things, that I had dragons, and what they look like. I have the concept of different colored dragons, different breeds and stuff, and they all have different powers, and so having examples of those helps. And it's just so much faster if you just look at one and then you just scroll up and look at some other ones and pin those too. So you can build it pretty quickly. Yeah. Okay. Oh, okay. Is that a writing tool or like a brainstorming tool or both or? Okay. Okay. Oh, I see. Mm. Yeah. 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 Yeah, Scrivener has these you can do like sticky note card things in there. And so I have done that as well a couple of times. Um, I tend not to take it very far. I don't know why. I just can't organize a story that way somehow. But I think other people have had success with it. It's so then the Scrivener's kind of nice in that you can create those note cards. So there's like a note card view essentially, and then you can shift to I can't remember if it's outline. There's like three main views. One is the scrivening view where you see the actual words. One is like this note card view, and then one is, I think it's an outline view or something, where you see them in sequence, like just a list of them basically. Um, and it's nice for early generation because you can kind of like put them up. And I guess for me, I think it would be more useful if you have a very large screen, because then you can just see more. Because part of the problem, I think note cards work so well because you can put them up on a wall or whatever, and you can see them all really quickly, and you can kind of randomly access them. Whereas if you have to scroll through a limited view through a larger canvas, it's hard to keep all that stuff in your head and where it is and stuff. But anyway, I think that has helped people too. Any other questions?
How do you find it that as you're writing, you just feel kind of okay, like it's time to stop writing the character, but it's not just like the way the story is flowing, or is it more of a? And I know this is going to be unique to you, not a global thing.
Yeah.
I'm curious, like it always struck me as interesting, and I've always wondered, and I'm sure there are writers that this is this character's arc, and this is this character's arc, they're like they're part of the story, but I guess I have a hard time envisioning how you choose like when to end this point and jump to this.
Yeah. I would probably give different answers at different times, but I think one habit that I've fallen into, and I find it natural, is that, well, so first of all, I do have multiple POVs. I'll figure out, which are the POV characters, early on, and I don't always know that totally up front. And then I'll try to plot them out. I'll try to plot all of the entire book, and then each individual, character's POV line, and how that contributes to the larger arc and such. And then I'll just, to begin, I'll just pick one, the one that probably speaks to me most. In the case of Sharkai, it was easy. I had one main character. I actually started this epic fantasy with the idea that I was going to write an epic fantasy with a single POV, and that was Cheda, the main character. And I could not do it. I got I don't know, 2/3 of the way through the first draft, and I'm like, I needed to show what happened with other people, what was going on with the kings who ruled the city, this rebellious group called the Moonless Host, and what was going on with them. These neighboring kingdoms have agents in the city as well who are doing things. And so I was trying to show all that stuff through Cheda's point of view by, having her talk to people or even magical means and stuff. And it felt really like contrived after a while. I was going through these like sort of literary gymnastics to try to, contort the story so she would understand, so the reader understands what's going on. And anyway, so I had to add more characters along the way. And so I fell into this scheme where I, figure out what's happening in each line, and I know that they're going to cross at certain points. They're not going to be like separate for the entire story. They're going to like sort of cross paths at some point, maybe split at some point as well. So I'll take the one that I feel the best about, I know the most about, whatever, and I'll start writing until I feel uncomfortable. Like I don't know what's going on yet, or I know he's going to meet up with this person, but I don't really know what's going on in the other thread. So I'll go as far as I can, and then I'll just switch to the one that makes the most sense at that point. And that's usually the one that she's about to meet or something like that. Or they're going to betray her because of whatever, And so I need those details to finish the scene, that I'm writing over here. So I'll switch, write that one, and then usually something else will cause me to switch to some of the other characters. So I kind of like do this odd little, switching back and forth just as needed, as time goes on. Yeah, and then at the end I'll have kind of a sloppy mess of a story, and then it's it's a lot about sort of tightening those connections between those threads and stuff and making it feel whole. Yeah, so inefficient probably, but I think we're all inefficient in a lot of different ways as writers and stuff. Any other questions? Well, yeah, sure. Quillings.com. I have a little contact button. Feel free to ping me if you got anything, if you're curious about something afterwards. And otherwise, thanks for coming.